Hi, my name is Dyonna Ginsburg.
And I'm Yedidya Sinclair.
And it's a pleasure to join you today for a discussion about of land and light, ethical dilemmas in international development. I am the executive director of OLAM, which is a shared platform to promote Jewish engagement in global service and international development. And it's a real pleasure to sit here with Yedidya, who's been a friend and colleague and fellow traveler for years. Yedidya will share a little bit more about his bio in a bit, but I'll share some of the highlights. He has been pioneering solar energy projects in Africa for the last several years, served as an economist in the UK government, and is an ordained rabbi who serves at Cambridge, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. At OLAM, one of the things that we do is look at the intersection between Jewish life and international development and ask ourselves a bunch of questions, including what do Jewish texts, values, tradition, culture, history have to contribute to the field of international development? How can ancient Jewish wisdom illuminate some of the ethical dilemmas that exist in this field? And most importantly, why should we as Jews care about global issues? And today what we're going to do is use an opportunity to take a case study from Yedidya's work and have a Jewish textual conversation about that. This is sort of an experimental format. I think we're going to have a Torah-infused conversation where we'll be referencing a variety of sources. We've produced a source sheet which you should be able to download from the Global Day of Jewish Learning website and use it either during the session or after the session itself. And we're hoping that this will be more than a two-way conversation, and encourage you to use the chat function in order to weigh in, share insights, ask questions. So without further ado, I guess I'll open up with a question, and this is, we're gonna do a shakavatara, give and take, in which both of us will ask questions of each other, reference the text, and provide insights. So the first question is really, you have spent the last several years deeply immersed in the fields of solar energy, but that's only one step along your journey. If you could share a little bit in terms of how your current work is related to who you are as a Jew, and what are some of the texts that have inspired or informed that journey throughout?
Yeah, thank you, Dyonna. It's a really tremendous pleasure to be doing this conversation with you and working in partnership with OLAM. I'm really excited about the work that OLAM is doing to open up opportunities for Jews around the world to volunteer in international development projects. Third world development has been a passion for me for about 25 years. And really from the beginning of that journey, it's been very important for me to figure out how this was a Jewish thing to do. It always seemed to me that it was a Jewish thing to do. And at the beginning, 25 years ago, I was kind of perplexed by the fact that there didn't seem to be more Jews who saw it like that. I remember that one of the first things that I did in international development was I went to volunteer with street children in Mexico City, working in the homes that they had for abandoned and battered street children way back then. And it was run by a Catholic priest who clearly saw it as a very religious thing to do. And I felt it was a Jewish thing to do. And I actually got there because 25 years ago on Yom Kippur, I was sitting in shul, in synagogue, having just recently graduated college and figuring out what on earth I wanted to do with my life. And I really didn't know. I thought, do I go and be a merchant banker or investment banker or management consultant like half my class from college were doing? Or I was getting interested in Jewish learning, and I thought maybe I should go to yeshiva, but I thought yeshiva is a very small place and the world's a very big place, and so kind of felt vaguely, and I wanted to do something in the world first before going to yeshiva. And I was sitting in shul, and it came to be the Haftorah, which I never really paid very much attention to, from the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 58. And what Isaiah says there is, he's like scolding the people and saying, is this the fast that you want? That you're bowing down your heads like a bulrush, and you're afflicting yourself, and you're paraphrasing here, saying, you know, we're so religious because we're not fasting, because we're fasting. No, he says that this is what the fast should be doing. Now, it should be undoing the bonds of wickedness, and you should be, because of your fast, you should be spreading out your reaching out your hands and giving bread to the hungry and bringing poor people into your house and clothing the naked. And then God says, you know, then I'll answer you, and then you'll call and I say, here I am. And at that moment, it just became clear to me, yes, there's such a Jewish thing to do. That's what Isaiah is saying, that on the holiest day of the year, if it's not making you more sensitive, more open to people who are hungry and people who are naked and people who are homeless, then what's the point? And I remember deciding then and there, yeah, I'm going to go do some voluntary work. And so I decided I was going to go to Mexico because I'd spent time there traveling, and it seemed to be there was a lot of need there, but it wasn't too crazy and uncivilized. So I'm returning to my dad and saying, Dad, I'm going to go to Mexico. And, what happened then, we don't have to talk about now, but but I stuck to that decision, and from then on, really, Jewish texts have accompanied and informed and inspired the work that I've been doing in international development, and that's continued over the past few years. When, as you said, Dyonna, got very involved in working in solar energy, particularly focused on Africa. For 5 years, I was privileged to serve as vice president at Energiya Global, an amazing Israeli company founded by Yosef Abramovitz, focused on Africa, solar in Africa. And now I continue to work on one of their projects. I'm directly for the project, but it's still, I see it as part of who I am as a Jew.
And I guess I'll share a little bit in terms of my own journey in that regard.
Yeah, do. I'd love to hear about that.
So I grew up in a home that was infused with Jewish texts. My father is a rabbi. My mother is a social worker who has a master's in Talmud. In fact, she recently shared with me that when I was a fetus, she purposefully learned out loud, thinking that would help inspire me. And so that was the world in which I grew up. And I remember one of the things, and I think that this is common in similar families, at a very early age, I learned Birkat Hamazon, the Grace After Meals. And I was a precocious child. And so, wanted to learn about what I was saying. And I remember asking, I don't know how old I was, but at a pretty young age, saying that there was something that didn't make sense to me, which is the phrase that appears at the very end that comes from the book of Psalms, from Tehillim, Nar hayiti v'gam zakanti. I was a young person and I grew old. V'lo ra'iti tzadik ne'ezav, and I have not seen a righteous person forsaken, v'zaro mevakesh lachem, and his children asking for bread. And I not only grew up in a house in which Jewish texts and rituals played a significant role, but my parents were very involved in tzedakah, and so I was not shielded from some of the sort of sadder things in society and came across poor people. And I remember asking that question, and it wasn't until years later that I got an answer which I don't think is grammatically true, but I think is homiletically true, which is if you parse the sentence in a different way, and there are a variety of explanations to this question, but if you parse the sentence in a different way, then there is a novel way of looking at that. So instead of narrating through the Gamsakanti, I was a young child and I grew old, and I have not seen someone who was forsaken, a righteous person forsaken. The way that you can divide up that sentence is narrating through the Gamsakanti v'lo. I went through life from a young child to an old person, and I did not open my eyes. Is it a wonder that righteous people are forsaken and their children ask for bread? Where sort of by putting in a comma and then a question mark exclamation point at the end, what that does is sort of give this question, which I think in its simple meaning that I understood as a child has larger theological ramifications about good and evil in the world and theodicy. I think by parsing the sentence in a different way, it restores it to the realm of human agency. You know, it's about opening up our eyes, and if we go through life blinded to the things around us, then it's not a wonder that there are people in our midst who are forsaken. And I think that explanation, which probably goes back about 7 or 8 years when I came across, 7 or 8 years ago when I came across that, I think that sort of provided something that I was searching for, because it somehow restored responsibility to human beings, saying, yes, this may be a theological question, but a lot of the systems of oppression that exist are actually as a result of human action or inaction in this case.
Well, that's a beautiful reading. I really love that. And I just want to say another word to appreciate what OLAM is doing. I mean, when I went and did my thing in Mexico, you know, there was no way to do that in a Jewish context. Now, I just went out and bought a ticket to Mexico, and I got some addresses from someone I knew who used to work in the British embassy there, and got on a plane and went and started calling people, and ended up, you know, working for this amazing Catholic priest. And you know, I felt I was doing it as a Jew, but there was no sort of recognition or framework or program that you could do. You could go on to do it as in a Jewish way. So I'm just so excited by what OLAM is doing in bringing these opportunities to have life-changing experiences, you know, volunteering with, you know, some of the poorest people in the world, and doing it in a Jewish way. So, you know, really kol hakavod for what you're doing here, Dyonna. Thanks.
So let me ask you a little bit in terms of your specific focus on solar energy, was the most recent manifestation of your Yom Kippur experience many years before. If you could share a little bit how you see that connecting to Jewish teachings.
Yeah, so I've been working trying to bring solar energy to Africa mainly for about 5 years. I was privileged to work on a pioneering project in Rwanda, which some people might know about, which was at the time the largest solar project in East Africa, developed by my friend Chaim Motzen, who did amazing work there. I'm really fortunate to worked with him on that. And of course, I think there's Jewish meaning in bringing energy, this crucial resource for international development, to the poorest people in the world. But I also really think that there's Jewish meaning in bringing solar to the world. And some of those ways might be obvious to people. You know, the fact that you're helping combat global warming, which is a tremendous environmental threat, and you know, some people say, you know, even a threat to the viability of our lives on the planet. And so trying to avert that and bring renewable energy to switch out fossil fuels, I think clearly has Jewish meaning and importance. But just beyond that, I think solar has Jewish spiritual significance in other ways which might not be so obvious to people, but were just as deep and just as important. So the first, the text which we want to think about is from Birkat HaChama. And Birkat HaChama is one of the rarest, or perhaps probably the rarest and most occasional Jewish ritual that you could ever experience, because it happens once every 28 years. It happened last in 2009. And so when you, the Mishnah in Brachot says that Tanu Rabbanan ha'ra'eh chama b'tekufato omer baruch oseh breshit. When one sees the sun at the beginning of the cycle, you say, "Blessed are you who makes the works of creation." And then the Gemara explains, what does it mean at the beginning of each cycle? It means every 20 years the cycle of the sun begins again. So the beginning of the Birkat HaChama before last, in 1981, where nobody really thought or talked very much about solar energy, the last Rebbe gave an amazing sikha about the importance of solar energy. You can click on the links, the hyperlinks which we've embedded in the text, if you actually want to see the Rebbe talking about solar energy. It's in Yiddish with English subtitles, but it's worth just clicking on it to see the Rebbe's extraordinary passion and conviction and visionary excitement with which he's talking about solar energy. So we put a fragment of the Rebbe's sikha on the text here, but what's amazing is the way he talks about solar in 1981, when nobody was thinking and talking about this, talks about solar as the future of energy for the United States, and the way in which solar has the ability to completely free the United States from dependence on oil-rich states, which at that point were, the Rebbe thought and felt, holding the United States to ransom effectively and distorting what should be the United States of proper energy policy, but also proper foreign policy. And what's extraordinary is the way the Rebbe felt that the United States was pursuing an energy policy and a foreign policy which was distorted the proper support and wholehearted embrace of the state of Israel, which they should have been the basis of the United States' policy, because of their indebtedness to Arab-rich oil countries. And as Dyonna said when we were talking about before, it's just amazing how the Rebbe thinks of the United States as a force for good in the world, and that they're prevented from being the force for good which they could fully be because of their dependence on oil. And the Rebbe says, but there's a solution. God has provided the answer, that just take a tiny bit of the United States, cover it with solar panels, and the United States could be fully energy dependent. So I always felt that it's an amazing articulation of the spiritual dimension of solar energy, and I think it feels fitting to mention the Rebbe Zatzal in this event of the Global Day of Learning sponsored by Aleph, where clearly the Rebbe's vision of using technology to bring Torah to all Jews is very much, I think, infusing and inspiring what the Global Day of Jewish Learning is all about. What do you think of this, Dyonna?
I mean, there are a couple of things that are interesting. As you said, I think I had never come across this sikha before, and it was due to our preparation for this session that I heard it for the first time, and I think it is well worth the view. And for me, it was interesting both in terms of the notion of energy independence and solar energy, but also the way that the Rebbe viewed, in particular, North America as being a force for good in the world. And just in light of sort of the recent divisive elections and the tension between forces of globalization and a tendency towards an isolationist foreign policy, I found this to be fascinating, in which the Rebbe basically looks at North America, calls it a malchut shel chesed, a nation or a kingdom of kindness, and sees this collective of having a significant piece of the world, and that for me was fascinating. I think another piece that was interesting is what appears in the second paragraph in source number 2 in front of you, in which there is a meta-awareness on the part of the Rebbe asking the question, why does it matter that the Jews in his room and or those, this was, pre-Facebook, pre-social media, those who were actually accessing it via wider channels, why does it matter that they're having this conversation? And I think there are two parts that are interesting. One part is he quotes what is an often cited piece of the Rambam of Maimonides. It talks, which is in Hilchot Tshuva, in the laws of repentance, which talks about sort of each person should think of himself or herself as if the world is in a state of limbo, where an individual action can actually tip the balance of the world. And there's something of profound sort of cosmic spiritual value to that mindset, sort of a spiritual butterfly effect, as you will. And I think that also sort of coheres with current thinking about, think global, act local, that you can do something small in your own life that actually has import on the world stage. And then he says, in addition, experience has shown that words initially spoken in private and later publicly can eventually reach a larger public. And there seems to be this notion of a ripple effect. It's not just about individual actions, but realizing that conversations matter. And sort of that reminds me of Margaret Mead's famous quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. But sort of the sense that, yes, individuals have the ability to change the cosmos, and also that conversations and Jewish conversations actually matter because there is sort of this ripple effect. And I think that sort of meta-awareness of, why is it important for us to even have this conversation is something that I think people often ask themselves, what can we as individuals do? And the Rebbe inserts that in a conscious way into this conversation.
Yeah, I think the power of conversation is a really important one. I mean, I remember one of the another great solar entrepreneur who I've worked for, named Arnold Goldman, who was the founder of Luz in the 1980s, which developed the first successful large solar projects in the world, which are built in California and still operating. Arnold was a very serious engineer and scientist and businessman, but he was also quite a serious student of Kabbalah as well. And his study of Kabbalah really informed and infused the work that he did in solar energy. Now, I remember going to the opening of his Bright Source Energy, his second company's first field in the Negev, which was a test field. It was a place called Rotem, and Rotem, I think, is a kind of a bush. And Arnold said that Siach is also a kind of a bush, and Siach means conversation. He's a big believer from a Kabbalistic point of view in the power of words and conversation to actually transform the reality. But Arnold's sense of the Kabbalistic significance of solar extended beyond that as well. the challenge with solar energy, the way Arnold described it to me, is that we have this tremendous source of light and energy, the sun, and which could, just a tiny amount of the energy which comes from the sun could power the whole world. The energy which falls on the earth in 1 hour could actually provide enough energy for all of the human needs for a whole year. And our challenge as human beings is to take a little bit of that energy and find ways to receive just a small amount of it in ways that we can use for human needs. And there's a parallel there between that and the way that the Kabbalists see the world. That our primary challenge as human beings is to make ourselves and our communities into kelim, into vessels, which can receive just a little bit of the amazing shefa, which is being poured out into the world every moment, far more than we can actually receive and use. But if we can find ways to receive just a little bit of it, then we can bring extraordinary things down into the world. So Arnold's very inspired, I think, and informed by the comparison between the Kabbalistic view of seeing the way light and energy and divine force comes into the world, and what we're trying to do in solar energy. At least that's the way I've understood the various conversations that I've had with him. He's a real pioneer in solar energy over the years. I wouldn't swear that that's exactly what he meant, but that's the way I received the shefa which came out of Arnold's mouth in these conversations. So it's another dimension, spiritual dimension of solar, which I've always tried to be aware of as well.
It's interesting because I think it's not coincidental, given the primacy of light in Kabbalistic texts and in the notion of these vessels, that the primary Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, actually means radiance or light, right? Because Zohar and Mazirim, that they shine like the radiance of the firmament. So that is part and parcel. I think I do not know Arnold personally, but I think there's that is not a superficial gloss, but that's key to Kabbalistic teaching. It's also interesting because in the last several weeks, I've seen on my Facebook feed the quote by Leonard Cohen, who just passed away, that I might botch at this moment, but something about everything having a crack in it, that's how the light gets in. And I read, as part of some of the obituaries, that was a very intentional reference to Kabbalistic thought, and that was not coincidental. That was him sort of doing a hyperlink in one of his lyrics to part of sort of his own Jewish roots and his understanding of sort of our role in the world, and so that's timely. It's interesting because up until our conversation, I think I had always subsumed sort of solar energy and larger questions of climate change, or larger sort of questions about environmental stewardship. And some of the sources that came to mind, there's one that I particularly like that is often cited in Kohelet Rabbah and the Midrashic compilation around Kohelet, where it has God showing Adam Rishon, Adam, sort of the Garden of Eden, and say, this world is yours to keep. And it says, but there's a sort of a sinister warning at the end that says, that if you sort of destroy this, there's no one else to fix it. So, I had always sort of subsumed questions of solar energy under larger questions about environmental stewardship. But one of the things that coming across sort of the Rebbe's understanding of Birkat HaChama, which was sort of in the throes of the 1979-1980 oil crisis, and some of Arnold Goldman's thinking is that there is actually something that is unique, that's different about solar energy, and that there is sort of a way of thinking about it that could be subsumed, but also is independent in that regard. I mean, I guess a question that I have is, when you first came across these texts, because these are things that you have known before my recent exposure, in what way did that sort of impact your work? Is it sort of an additional motivator? Is it just a reinforcer? Has it enabled you to communicate to others the importance of solar energy who are a part of sort of the Jewish community and who are literate in Jewish text? Meaning, in what ways, if we would zoom out for a second, in what ways does sort of unearthing that part of our tradition actually, other than saying, oh, this is nice and interesting, meaning what does that actually do for you?
That's a great question, Dyonna. I think it does a few things. I think on one level, it's an additional motivator. I think beyond that, I find that it gives a different way in to talking about the power and the value of renewables and solar, which actually has a kind of a wider appeal to people than just the environmental and global warming dimension of it. You know, unfortunately, the debate about global warming has become very politicized. And so, you know, you talk to half of the Jewish community. I had the experience of speaking to different communities in the United States. Half of the Jewish community says, you know, oh, it's great you're dealing with global warming. It's so important, Rabbi. It's the most important issue of our time. And great you're looking at it from a Jewish perspective. And then, you know, you go to the other half of the Jewish community and say, you know, what, like global warming? Like, you know, are you kidding? Don't you know that's kind of like a Democrat, Al Gore inspired communist plot to take over America, to destroy it? And there's really like two sides, you know, and reflecting the political debate in American society, people just talking past each other. And so if you have a way of talking about it, which isn't, you know, it says, yeah, I think global warming is important, but it has these other dimensions too that actually helps us to connect to God and to understand the Shepherd, which is coming down on us. And there's actually a very different spiritual quality, you know, to using energy which is dug out of the ground and sold to us by like nasty people in the Middle East on the one hand, and using energy which comes down and hits receivers on our roofs and, you know, boom, you know, lights our houses on the other. It's a different experience. And people say, oh, I can connect to that. I can see how there's added value to that over and above, you know, the effect on climate change, which we may or may not believe in. So I think actually source 6 on our sheets, you know, to me takes this discussion about the spiritual added value of solar a couple of steps further. So source 6 from Ta'anit, the Yerushalmi. Do you want to read it, Dyonna?
Sure. I'm going to read it in the English to level the playing field. Rabbi Hanan from Sinclair said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, because of 4 things, the Holy One, blessed be He, changed his mind and decided that the land of Israel would only drink from above, in parentheses, and not from rivers. because of the strong, in order to disperse bad vapors, so that the high up people and the lowly should drink alike, and so that all would turn their eyes to the heavens.
So this is a text remarking on the interesting fact that unlike, for example, Egypt and Babylon, which had big rivers, the land of Israel doesn't have big rivers, and therefore it's dependent for its water on rainfall. And so Rabbi Chanan ben Tzipori in the Yerushalmi is saying, that's not just a coincidence. The fact God set it up like that, so to speak, in order that the land of Israel would have very different ecological and therefore spiritual characteristics, because it got its rainfall from above and not from below. So what are the characteristics? They mention 4 things. One, because of the strong, meaning I think that if you have a river, then then someone strong person can control the river. They can dam it, or they can say only I'm allowed to collect from the river. As in fact, if you look at Ezekiel chapter 3, you see how the Egyptian Pharaoh dominated and controlled the river and turned himself into a god because he had that control. Right? If you have the rivers, like earthly resources, lend themselves to being able to do that. In order to disperse bad vapors, so when the rain comes, it disperses the smells and the bedsitters and the mists and the bad vapors in the world, so that the high up people and the lowly should drink alike, right? Because everybody can collect the water equally. You can put a tub or a container in your house or on your roof, and anybody can get access to the rainfall, and so that all would turn their eyes to the heavens, right? So that that you are conscious of being dependent on heaven for rainfall. And so we pray for rain in the land of Israel, and we fast if the rain's not coming, at least in Talmudic times, and occasionally in modern times as well. And we're conscious that we're dependent on heaven for this essential life-giving force. Whereas if you just go down and draw it from the river, and the river is always there, and you take it for granted, that has a different spiritual kind of effect. So if you substitute oil, the word oil for water in this Talmudic piece, it's remarkably accurate, a description of how things work around, in the Middle East, right? That oil becomes controlled by the strong. Yes, it creates bad vapors, pollution, global warming. The high up people and the lowly don't equally drink from it. Right? The powerful control the oil, and so it's no accident that oil-rich countries tend to be dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, because they don't have to empower their people, they don't have to educate their people, they don't have to rely on people's ingenuity, they don't have to give women rights. They have wealth just by digging a hole in the ground, pulling up the stuff, selling it, and having monopolistic rights to that. The one thing so that's a pretty accurate geopolitical analysis of the effects of what happens when you get your oil, your energy from the ground. The last point, is not usually included in those analyses, but I think it's very important also, so that all should turn their eyes to the heavens. So you don't take this resource for granted. You don't think, this is like, this is something that I control as the strong man in this country, and therefore, that's what gives me my power. But it gives you a sense of humility, that you're dependent on heaven for rainfall, and that the source of wealth and sustenance in your country comes from the heaven and is not under your control. So So if you look at, you think about this in terms of solar, right? Solar is the opposite of oil, right? Anybody can put a solar panel on their roof and have access to energy. Nobody can control the sun. The sun doesn't recognize borders. And when you look up at the sun and you see that as your source of energy, rather than fossilized sunlight for 1 billion years ago in terms of fossil fuels, it's hard to remember that that was originally the sun. But if you know if it's coming from the sun right now and it's being translated like that into electrons which are powering your house, then you become immediately and intensely aware of the connection between the energy coming into your house and the divine source of energy above you. So there are a lot of layers that, about the spiritual significance of solar.
So from Birkat HaChava through the Lubavitcher Rebbe to this source in Ta'anit and the Kabbalah, we can see the real value from a Jewish perspective of solar energy. I am curious to hear from you in terms of how that actually plays itself out in the process of setting up solar fields. And this particular source in Ta'anit does indicate that when it comes to resources and allocation of resources, there are complications that can happen along the way. And one of the things that I know from large-scale development projects in the fields of solar energy or otherwise is that it requires large pieces of land, and that sometimes that involves displacing indigenous communities. And so I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more of what that sort of process looks like and perhaps some of the dilemmas that come up as a result.
Sure. So I've been involved in a large project in Africa where we have that challenge and dilemma of, as you say, needing a really, really large piece of land to develop a big solar field, which is going to help this country a lot in their economic development and enable large populations of people to have energy and access to energy for education and for healthcare and for economic development, which they didn't have before. But at the same time, there's people living on this piece of land, and as much as you try to find some land which doesn't have people living on it, you encounter this situation. So when you have this situation, there are fortunately really, really detailed and demanding standards for how you have to go about rehousing the people in a humane way, and that you have to consult with them and you have to figure out what they want in terms of where they want to go and how their community wants to be resettled together. And you have to consult with all levels of the community, from the chiefs to the men and the women and the vulnerable people, and you really have to. The international financing bodies who are putting money into your project really insist that you do this properly, and that's a way in which it coincides with our Jewish values. That we obviously do not want to do people harm in this process, but we want to make sure that the people concerned are better off after the project than they were before the project. But it's taken an enormous amount of time and energy and care in order to figure out how to do this in a humane way and in a Jewish way as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, sometimes conversations that have to do with human rights and land rights, sort of big business is pitted against human rights, where there's a very clear dichotomy between sort of what is self-interest and the good of humanity. And here, What's complicated is that there's a real values conflict of two sort of competing values. One value is all of sort of the abundance and shifa that solar energy does provide for the world, for the country, hopefully for that local community. And the other value is the value of having people be able to live on their lands and live their lives with dignity. And so being able to sort of navigate both of those and trying to do this together is really interesting. And one of the things that I often think about is an interpretation of Rav Simcha Pidgeska, I think that's how it's pronounced, a Hasidic master who lived in the mid-1700s to early 1800s, in which he looks at the famous verse, which you can see here in your source sheet, source number 3, Tzedek tzedek tirdof, leman techei ve'arash ha'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha. Justice, justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And he looks at the question, like many other commentators, why do you have the double usage of the term tzedek, justice? And the simple reading of that is that it's a way of just reinforcing the importance of justice. But what he says is that there are, that you need to pursue justice justly. That just because the ends are just, does not excuse whatever path you take to get there. You need to ensure that the path itself is just as well. And I think that one of the things that you're talking about in terms of these international standards is trying to sort of make sure that the path to justice is one that's just as well. I think one of the things that's interesting here is that often when this verse is cited, only the beginning part of the verse is cited, which is justice you shall pursue, and not the remainder, which is actually situated in a particular piece of land. Here it's talking about the land of Israel. But if we extrapolate, there does seem to be this deep connection between justice and an embodied living in land. It's not a disconnected or disembodied sense of justice. And so, all the more so, I think here it's relevant. When you were doing this survey, I know that there were parts of the findings that came back that seemed very familiar. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, at first I think you're right that big business often has a bad rap, and sometimes very justly so, in terms of its role in these big infrastructure projects, and they treat the local people badly. You know, we really feel that it doesn't have to be like that, and that some economic development projects which have to be done, like electrifying Africa, which are going to take hundreds of billions of dollars, are so big that the NGO world can't do it, and it has to be business that does it, and that mobilizes the technology and the capital on the scale that is necessary. And so there have to be models for business doing that in an ethical way. And as you said, we're beholden to what the World Bank says, and the World Bank says what it says, partly because it doesn't want any trouble, or it doesn't want people picketing their projects. And I'm sure there are also ethical motivations there as well. But we feel that we do what they want us to do, not just because we have to tick the boxes, but because as a Jewish, Israeli-based clean energy company, we want to be sort of clean energy all the way through, as Yosef Abramovich likes to put it, and that we definitely do not want to make money and bring solar energy by doing harm to the people who are involved. We want to make sure that they are better off in every possible way as a result of our projects. So as you said, Dyonna, we, in order to figure out how we're going to benefit the local community, we have to, first of all, understand in depth who they are and how they're earning their livings right now, and what their houses look like, and what their communities are like, so that we can figure out how to work with them in the best way that we can. And as you say, one of the interesting things that that came back when we asked them what kind of houses they wanted to live in afterwards was, well, basically houses which are like the ones that they have, only a bit bigger and a bit nicer. First of all, we showed them some drawings from sketches from what really nice kind of Western style little bungalows, laid out in rows would look like, and said, "Do you like this?" And they said, "No, this is not what we have in mind." And there were a few things that came out which they said were really, really important for their houses. One of them, they said, was that the windows had to be above eye level. That was really important for them for reasons of modesty, because this is a very religious Muslim community, and it's really important that they're not able to look into each other's houses and see each other's business and know what everybody else is doing. And when this came back, well, hey, I've seen this somewhere before. And as you say, Dyonna, in the first chapter of Talmud Bava Batra is mostly about...
And source number 4.
Source number 4. This is actually, I think, from the 3rd chapter, but this illustrates the point most sharply. Is about a concept of hezek re'iyah called hezek re'iyah. And hezek re'iyah means the damage which is done by people looking at you, seeing into your home, and knowing what you're up to, and being able to observe all your private business. So this Mishnah in Bava Batra expresses that concept most sharply, I think. It says that to read it in English. In a courtyard which a person shares with others, a person should not open a door facing another person's door, nor a window facing another person's window. And if it's small, if the window's already an existing window, you should not enlarge it, and you should not turn one window into 2 windows. And then he says, if you're talking about a public domain, therefore, however, those things are okay. So if you share a courtyard with other people, you should not make it easier to see into somebody else's house. And then the Gemara asks, how do we know this? Mina hani mili. Amar Rabbi Yochanan to Amar Kra. Rabbi Yochanan said, because the verse says, the verse in Bamidbar, so this is a speech of Bilam, who was a non-Jewish prophet, who the king Balak said to curse the people of Israel, and he said he saw them dwelling in their tribes. So the Gemara says, well, what exactly did he see? Because when he saw this, Bilam was moved to bless the people. And to offer this beautiful, poetic blessing, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, Mishkanatecha Yisrael, and your dwelling place is Israel. So what exactly did he see? The Rabbi Yochanan asks, which made him utter this blessing. That he saw that the entrance to their tents were not facing one another, but the layout of their settlement was such that you couldn't see into somebody else's tent. And Bilam said, wow, these people are worthy that the Shekhinah should rest upon them. So I thought, well, this is amazing. That what these people in this African village are telling me about how they want their village to lay out is is exactly what I'm familiar with from the Talmud about how it's a Jewish value that in our built space, if you like, in our villages and ancient settlements, they should be set up in the same way so that people should not be able to see into other people's dwellings. And I thought, well, this is a value which we've lost. I mean, when people hire architects to design their houses, and when urban planners sit down to figure out how cities and towns and villages in Israel are going to be laid out, is this something which they think about? Not sure that it is. I've never really seen this on in the plans and on the drawing board for Jewish architecture and urban design. But these people 3,000 miles away were teaching me something which a long time ago we knew already, that this is something about how we should lay out our towns and villages if we want them to be Jewish, if we want them to be spiritual, if we want them to be ru'uyin, the Shekhinah should dwell upon them. So this, I think, something I learned from this African village when about how our villages and how our dwellings, if you like, should look.
It's interesting because you had shared this with me as both sort of a point of connection to people living geographically far away in a different culture, and also an opportunity to help reflect on parts of our own tradition which we don't necessarily apply in our day-to-day lives in terms of how we live, and use this as a very specific example of something that you encountered. But when I looked at this text, I saw this as actually giving insight into the fields of international development in general, and looked back at the original source material that you'll see in source 5 in Bamidbar, where we actually have OLAM and his encounter. And what you have here, as you said, he's a farm prophet. He's an outsider. He's not a member of the community, and he is coming with a critical eye, right? And in fact, if you look at the verses, the word eye or sight appears numerous times. In the very first verse, it says, seeing that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, but in Hebrew it's Vayar Bilam Kitov Be'enei Hashem. He saw that it was good in the eyes of God to bless Israel, and therefore he decided not to go in search of omens, but he turned his face to the wilderness. And then in the second verse you see it says, he looked up, he raised his eyes, and he saw the people. And then in the actual words in verse 3 and 4, the way he describes himself, the word of Bilam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true, with eyes unveiled. And then he says the verse that has now become famous because it is the first prayer that is said upon entering a synagogue in the morning, Matovu Alecha Yaakov, how fair are your tents, O Jacob. And so what you have here is someone who's outside of a community, coming with a critical eye, but seeing that the way that God works is with a different type of sight, and he sees what actually is unseeable, which is sort of this privacy that people have. And the true beauty is the fact that you can't see everything. And it feels to me that in international development context, even in social impact businesses and or NGOs doing this work, as outsiders, we come to communities, and even if we're not fully aware of it, there is a critical eye, but it's that unmasking or unveiling and the ability to actually see the community for what it is. But there is an acknowledgement here that there's limitations at that site, right? Because the beauty that Bilam is actually seeing here is that they are private and that their windows don't face one another, and that there is something that you can never fully perceive. And so for me, this was just a really interesting example of both, I think, the attitude that outsiders can and should have towards the communities that they interact with, which is about trying to see as well as possible, but also realizing that there is a beauty in the fact that we will never fully understand or see, and that there's an inherent sort of privacy here, and that there is the ability to have hizikriya, damage of the eyes, if we look at it in a critical way. I think our time is almost up, but wanted to give you a chance to sort of respond or share any final thoughts before we wrap up our conversation for today.
Yeah, I love that way that you just read the psukim in Bamidbar, and the idea that really looking, for example, at a community that you're working with means seeing, if you like, what you can't see, and recognizing that there are things going on in that community which you can't really fully get to the bottom of, and that kind of humility in working with a community and figuring out together with them what they want and what they need, and that there's processes and there's dynamics and there's needs which you can't fully understand, and therefore you have to listen closely to what they want, is also, I think, a very important Jewish value in how you come to work with communities in the developing world. So thanks a lot for bringing that out. That's a critical point, I think.
So I just want to summarize the journey we've been through. Basically, we have spent some time. Can you read the chat, what it says?
I can. I've got I see there's a great question from Miriam. Thank you very much, Miriam. Let me read it. Why not build small solar installations next to existing villages instead of a huge solar facility that displaces people? That would encourage local ownership and stewardship. That's a great question, and the answer is, Miriam, that we're trying to do both. The reason to build a large field is that it's simply as far as the scale of what some of these countries need. You need to build big. We're working with a country which is many times more populous than Israel, for example, but has about 5% of the electricity that Israel has. And our project, which we're building, will give them about between 5 and 7% more electricity. So that makes a big difference to their ability as a country to develop, and it brings electricity to cities where you can't so easily put build small installations, and it's so as far as their overall development means, it makes a big difference. But at the same time, we also want to bring small scale solar to villages, and particularly to the village which we're building for the people who are displaced. So we're looking at small scale solar energy development because we think it's obviously wrong to build a big solar field right next to this village, and for the people not to have solar energy themselves. But that's a great question. Thank you. Another question. Thank you very much, Ariel. I'll read the question. Ariel says, you've done a great job explaining how Judaism inspires solar development, but continuing with what you learned from building houses in Africa, I would love to hear about the personal experiences in engaging in global service, working on the ground in non-Jewish communities, and how that's inspired and influenced your Jewish experiences. Dyonna, do you want to have a go at that one?
Sure. I think for me, as somebody who is a student of Jewish texts and thinks about the world in that way, some of the experiences that I had are similar to what Yedidya had in terms of having an encounter that on the face of it is foreign, different, and yet seems strikingly familiar. So, for example, when I spent time in Ethiopia, one of the things that I discovered is that the way that Ethiopians keep time is, apropos the topic of light and sunlight, is very similar to the halachic system of keeping time, which goes from dawn to sunset. And sort of being in a culture that tells time in a different way than Western culture does, but that is much more in sync with how traditional Jewish culture keeps time, for me, that enables me to both connect with the local culture, but also think about time and why we keep time in different ways and what does that mean, and things that I sort of had taken for granted in terms of the notion of shalot zmaniyot or halachic time in that way. And so I think it's that interaction with a different culture, a different society, and seeing both, you know, in these two cases it's similarities, but I think sometimes the differences also can highlight for us parts of our own tradition. And that's, you know, just one example for me of what that has been like.
Thank you.
All right, I think that is all the time that we have for now. What I hope that we've done over the last hour or so is take a real case from the field and looked at how Jewish texts and Jewish values both serve as a motivator for the essence of the work in terms of solar energy in this example, how we do that work justly and not only aim for a just end, and also how some of the texts in our own tradition can help us both better appreciate the encounter with a different culture, but also have us reflect and think critically about our own. I would encourage you, if this has sort of whet your appetite, to check out OLAM's website, www.olamtogether.org, where you can find both a videotape of this webinar and all the sources, and also a podcast series that we recently ran together with the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies, in which you will find both me and Yedidya on different episodes, and that podcast series, similar to today, looks at modern issues and international development from a Jewish lens. Thank you very much to everybody in the audience, and thank you, Yedidya.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dyonna.
Great.